Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, well, we'll let folks in as they come, and so glad to have you all with us today. My name is Russell. I am the training and network manager here at Edible Schoolyard Project, and we're so pleased to have you all here, and so pleased to have this collaborative workshop with poet Tess Taylor. So glad for our time together. Just gonna share a little bit of background information about Edible Schoolyard, and we'll get going into the workshop very soon. But some of you may know this, some of you may have been part of our other workshops up to now. But Edible Schoolyard is a 30-year-old organization that was founded in Berkeley, California by chef and activist Alice Waters. Our flagship program site is located at a public middle school in Berkeley, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Middle School, where we serve 1,000 students at the school, the families, their communities, the staff, through garden education, cooking education. And additionally, in the last 5 or 6 years or so, we've been fortunate to add an additional program site in Stockton, California, which is a urban farm serving the local community through CSA programs, farm and field trips, quarterly events. And so we're very pleased to have both these sites um, to have a platform for sharing practices for folks like yourselves. And so, to that vein, our network and training program seeks to support and provide resources and capacity building experiences so that folks like yourself from all over can have the support and see your visions of edible education come into life as well. So, and that's why we're having these virtual workshops monthly, and so glad to get to have the time with you all here today. Just a little quick logistics note. You may have noticed as you came in that we are recording this workshop, and that is so that yourselves and general audience can have access to the recording and content afterwards. So we want to make this an ongoing resource for folks. And to that point, if we very much encourage and hope that this can be an interactive workshop, please note that if you come off a mute and engage and interact with the content and ask a question, that your video and audio will be included in the recording. If you'd rather not have that not be included in the recording, please feel free to post in the chat and engage through that medium. And if I can provide any support, please feel free to let me know. But either way, so grateful for you to be here. Thank you for joining us. And with that, I am excited to introduce Tess Taylor, our facilitator for today. And Tess is a poet and the author of the anthology Leaning Towards Light, which is a compilation of poems connecting to gardens, gardeners, and the many living beings that engage and thrive in garden ecosystems. And I first got to collaborate with Tess at our in-person training this past June, where she helped open the event through an exploration of poetry, an exploration of the poems from that anthology, Leaning Towards Light. And it was just such a powerful and connecting experience, even for just the 20 minutes or so that we had that time. And it was absolutely the inspiration for a deeper dive, which is happening today, to actually get to really have a little bit more space to explore the power of observation, the power of poetry, and what that can bring for our students in garden settings. So, thank you so much, Tess, and so excited for our collaboration in the workshop here today. Thank you for joining.
Yay, I'm so glad to be here. Um, I wanted to just quickly share, well, a little bit about myself so far. In addition to being the author of 5 books and a gardener, I'm also serving as the poet laureate of my town, El Cerrito, California, and I won a grant from the Academy of American Poets to create youth programming in the schools. The schools that I'm teaching in aren't such that I'm able to do teaching of poems in gardens because that just didn't align. But I do love poems that are about gardening, and I am working with a series of youth in an underserved district from the ages of 7 to 17. So in some ways, I feel like um, I know this demographic pretty well, and I've been working with them writing poems all year, as well as having led a lot of workshops about teaching poetry in the gardens. And it's interesting because my own background is I kind of was a wayward kid and ended up working at the farmers markets and at a template for Alice Waters Edible Schoolyard in the 90s in Berkeley. And I was a youth educator there. And then I grew up and I sort of drifted towards poetry. And as I got to New York, I did some tree planting with kids in the Bronx, but drifted into the publishing world. And somehow in the publishing world, I felt like my gardening self and my publishing world self like couldn't be the same person. And so on Saturdays, I worked in a community garden in Brooklyn. And somehow like my publishing friends, like it was all martinis and cigarettes. And then on Saturdays, I was all like, tomatoes and homemade pickles. And it's really only in the last few years that I've really just honored the fact that the my writer self and my poet self and my gardening self and my youth activist self all get to hang out together so much. And so I am so excited to be here today and to have reconnected with Russell. Thank you for that great introduction. Um, and Russell, are you able to start the slideshow real quick? I'm fumbling for it just a second. I feel like you might be the better one to just get it going.
Yeah, let me see if I can pull that up here. Just should be able to.
Just to show you, these are my four single books of poetry. One is an exploration of roots in Virginia. One is about a year spent working on a farm in Western Massachusetts. And the other two are explorations of sort of place and history and soil, even in California, where I live. They kind of dive deep into the particularities of place, and they take place as a lens of work looking at the world. So the book Rift Zone is about living on a fault line in California, and it takes that notion that if we like examine our cracking soil very seriously, it's not just geology, it's metaphor. And so we are living in a place that is fracturing in lots of ways and also transforming in front of us. And what does that mean? Um, and this other book, Last West Road Songs for Dorothea Lange, is a book about following the photographer Dorothea Lange around California as she looking at her legacy now. She photographed agricultural laborers in the 30s and 40s. And what is it like to revisit the places she photographed now in an era where we're driven by climate migration and land use questions, and of course, questions around shelterlessness. All the issues she photographed were really contemporary. So I wanted to share that with you partly because I think when we come to a garden, we think a lot about the specifics of what makes the soil good, what makes the plants grow, what gives us delight, what makes things thrive. And I think that attentiveness is a kind of attentiveness that also poems and poetry help us cultivate. Um, Russell, can you move the slideshow forward just one? So, outside the practice of my life as a poet, I gathered together a bunch of contemporary poets on the act of gardening, leaning toward light, poems for gardens and the hands that tend them. And this is a contemporary book about poems about gardening in this era of sort of climate crisis. And one of the things I wanted to know is, could you just see like a show of hands? Who's ever used poems as a teaching tool in the garden? Anybody? Y'all do a lot of wonderful teaching, but has anybody ever used a poem to bring kids together in the garden? We do science, we do, I don't know, tasting, we use our senses that way, but has anybody used poetry? Um, I see a couple hands for sure. Um, Would anybody be willing, out sometimes with haiku, outdoors, yes. I'm seeing some answers there. I saw some thumbs up. But I want to explore that today because I think poems can be a really helpful tool for helping us all come to that full awareness of senses and sensory delight. And so, yeah. Um, Russell, could you move forward just one? I wanted to begin by just reading a poem for the season that we're in now. Um, a poem that I wrote when I worked on a farm in the Berkshires. And just think about how the work of a poem can do some of the noticing uh, of the exact time that we stand in and the season that we're in. Mud season. We unstave the winter's tangle, sad tomatoes, sullen sky. We unplay the summer's blight. Rotted on the vine, black fruit swings free of strings that bound it. In the compost, ghost melon. In the fields, grotesque extruded peppers. We prod half-thawed mucky things. In the sky, starlings eddying. Tomorrow, snow again, old silence. Today, the creaking, icy puller. Last night, I woke to wild, unfrozen prattle. Rain on the roof, a foreign liquid tongue. So, that is just a poem that really just heaps up the detail of what a field looks like at the turn of the season. And in a way, it's a poem of just looking at the compost, and listening to the noises around you at that moment. And I think that this can be a really important act of connecting and attending. Um, Russell, can I get control of the share now? Would that be all right?
Of course. Yeah.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much. Um, so for those who have used poems in the garden or writing in the garden, would anyone be brave enough to raise their hand and share what that was like what they had done, what they did with youth? I see that Jenny Garcia said, we note in writing our senses a very rudimentary explore exploration, would like some inspiration. Um, but I like this word writing in our senses because I think a garden is there to allow us to see and take part in this really big form, which is life, really. It's things growing and blooming and taking fruiting and passing and wilting. And when we're with the plants, we understand something about the movement of like nature, which is really very too big to see. And we also understand something about the movement of the lives of plants and about um, things that surprise us, things that we control, things that we don't control. We're put in a very interesting relationship with like life or nature. Let's just call those big things. And in a poem, I think we have a similar experience where we get to make a container to explore the juiciness and delight of language. We get to feel the sensory joy of this big force that we're using and part of all the time. We're always part of language. But in a poem, we get to look and feel more closely. And I think that's why poetry and gardening are kind of they have a synchronicity. They share congruent shapes, if I'm borrowing some language from geometry. And so I bet you're sitting there thinking, well, she's talking on this really high level and she has all these books, but like, how do we like do this with kids? Like, how do I get into the garden with kids in a way? Um, Yes, the smell of tilled earth. That's a beautiful line, the smell of tilled earth. Um, so, and how do we use like plants and gardening with kids in a way that kind of makes that synchronicity feel um, useful, you know? Um, First of all, could you raise your hand if you're like a dedicated only garden teacher? Okay. So I'm seeing that. And I just wanted to suggest that it's a great time if you're interested in poems in the garden to reach out to a language arts teacher in your school and say, "Hey, I just went to this workshop. I'm really interested. Would you be interested in like doing some lesson planning around like writing and noticing in the garden?" And sometimes they've never thought of it, or sometimes they're like really, really having to teach to any number of these standardized tests that the kids have to take now, and they're like, uh, but the idea that you could come outside in the spring and have like a couple days writing poems in a garden, it might delight them. And maybe they would think to themselves, oh, like when we finally get done with that one test in April, we could go and, you know, do a joint activity where we planted seeds and then talked about what that was like. I did some sensory writing and built some poems. And I wanted to suggest first and foremost that or maybe you'll do it yourself. You can be brave and do it yourself. But I also think it's a great chance to reach out to language arts teachers. I have discovered teaching in the public schools this year that there are a lot of language art teachers that are secretly poets or fiction writers, and they may just have their heart flutter if you give them a chance and say, "Would you like to come to write poems in the garden with your kids?" They might say, "Oh, yes, please. Where do I start?" And I think that where do I start um, I love this line, the smell of tilled earth. I wonder if that can make its way into a poem that we would even write today. That would be so cool. So I want to start right now with you all were given a packet, and don't feel worried if you didn't get to it because it's haiku by Basho. And the cool thing is, if you didn't do the reading, it's very short, and we will just be going over it right now. And if you did do the reading, it'll just be delicious to do again. So I wanted here to share. Okay, let's be sure that the share is working the way that I want it to. Um, Here we go. Can people see this share? And what happens if I make it 125%? Is that good? Can you, again, I'm looking at a few people who are raising their hands. Thank you for just giving me a thumbs up if you can read this yes, thank you. So, for those that don't know, a lot of times we get taught haiku like a 575 form, and we get really interested in just writing a short poem by counting syllables. But there was sort of a deeper way of thinking about it that's in a beautiful book by Bob Hass, who is a wonderful translator of Japanese haiku. Um, he's a Berkeley-based poet, Robert Hass. And if you're poetry curious and looking for a joyful and accessible way in by somebody who really knows and loves plants and nature, Robert Hass might be a really fun person for you to read first. But one of the things that he did was he translated this poet Basho, who lived in the late 17th century Japan, and he made a point of wandering on the brand new roads um, that Japan had just opened. He was like it was walking, but he was kind of a road trip poet of sorts. Um, and just to get us in the mood a little, I wanted to read this little piece by little prose. He said, "There was a time when I envied those who had government offices or impressive domains. And on another occasion, I considered entering the precincts of the Buddha and the teaching room of the patriarchs. Instead, I've worn out my body on journeys that are as aimless as the winds and clouds, and expended my feelings on flowers and birds. But somehow I've been able to make a living this way. And so, in the end, unskilled and talentless as I am, I give myself wholly to this one concern, poetry." But I assume that you, as gardening teachers, have also expended your feelings on flowers and birds, and that that is a joyful part of your life. Um, and and as we do this, as we enter into some writing together, which we'll do, um, to think about what is the point of expending our feelings on flowers and birds, is a good question to have in our hearts. Um, would I, this is such a nice, actually small group. Would it be so wild if I asked Marie, would you be willing to read the first haiku here?
Okay, sure. Let's see. Haiku. Autumn moonlight.
Autumn moonlight, a worm digs silently into a chestnut. Marie, let's have you give you the second one, and then you won't mute yourself by mistake. It won't we'll have better luck with the sound.
A snowy morning by myself, chewing on dried salmon.
Amy, read the next one. Amy Friedrichs.
Oh, you said my name right. This road, no one goes down it. Autumn evening.
Nice. Fidel Garcia, would you read the next one?
Many nights on the road, not dead yet. The end of autumn.
Anybody know that feeling? It's a very- Um, Sarah, would you read the next one, Sarah Lederman?
A cool fall night. Getting dinner, we peeled eggplants, cucumbers.
A caterpillar this deep in fall, still not a butterfly. Um, Eliza, would you read this next one, Waking in the Night?
Sure. Waking in the night, the lamp is low, the oil freezing.
And Sorrel, will you read the one about leeks?
Sure. The leek's newly washed white. How cold it is.
So I want to stop and say, away from the pattern of 575 that we're often taught, would anybody like to be able to tell me how these poems perform their noticing? They're just, what are you noticing about the way they're noticing?
It seems like he starts with a setting almost, and then there's some kind of action.
There's definitely a linking between maybe a very distinct action and kind of a wider setting, right? So autumn moonlight is like a big picture right there, and then we get really tiny. A worm digs silently into the chestnut. I mean, it's hard. That's a very big leap. If we were holding a camera, the camera would go so wide on the sky and then it would have to go so close to the chestnut, right? Yeah. That's a very important noticing of how these ones work. Um, other noticing?
I know I notice just the use of the hyphens, the way it kind of sets apart one of the lines in each of the haikus or stanzas, which goes along with what we were just saying about the setting and the smaller and the deeper observation. But when you're looking at it visually, that really jumps out at me how it's separated. They're separated all with the hyphens.
Completely. And of course, I think probably Bob Hass chose the punctuation, but we do sort of notice that there's like two lines and one line, right? So a cool fall night is big again, and then getting dinner, we peeled eggplants and cucumbers. Or a caterpillar this deep in fall, and then still not a butterfly. So there's a little bit of a movement, right, between, and it's like a punctuated movement. Two lines for a close detail and one line for a big detail of maybe the season or the time, right? Um, that's a great other noticings.
Doesn't really follow the 5-7-5.
No. No, it's more like two images, one an image that gets you at big time and one that gets you at precise action. It's really a hinging between two gestures, and that it doesn't really need them to be 5-7-5.
I'm just curious because I was curious when I read it the first time because it's translated from Japanese. Was it 5-7-5 in Japanese and he tried to translate it accurately for meaning, or do they not actually use the 5-7-5 formula in Japanese and that's sort of a different a
Yeah, there's rules about syllabics, and he decided not to do that because there was this other pattern that had to do with the haiku measuring an image that shows the time of year and the time of day with a very precise image that shows an action in the moment. And he said that that was what he was valuing and carrying these over.
he being the translator or he being the
Bob
basho,
Hass. Bob Hass, carrying Basho over.
the translator.
Bob Hass carrying the translation over. And translation is always like that, right? You do have to, you can make choices. I'm actually working on translations from Latin right now, and Latin has a really different sense of what should be passive and what should be active voice. And if I were really faithful to everything that was passive and everything that's active as like to show that I really understood what the grammar was most literally, everything would sound really wonky. But instead, I'm sort of playing with the different way of constructing how the sentence can come across. So for him, what I think is really beautiful about what he's done is he's given us a little formula that we can do with ourselves and with kids, which is write a little phrase or sentence that has to do with the time of day and the season that it is, and then find something, one distinct thing to look at. And if it makes you uncomfortable to call these haiku perfectly, you could call these like haiku inspired poems, you know? But where we are with it is that you have this formula where we're hinging a little bit into linking a picture of the day to a really precise picture of something that we notice. So, getting dinner, we peeled eggplants, cucumbers. That's only something that could happen, at least in a seasonal Alice Waters world, on a cool fall evening, right? The the eggplants and cucumbers become an illustration of this moment in time, and this moment in place. Naomi, are you troubled by the translation problem?
Oh no, I was just curious, honestly.
Yeah, no, I mean but it's an interesting one. We could jump into that. Sorrel, what were you, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I just have a thought and a wondering about the relationship between haiku and breath.
Yeah. Well,
Did I freeze?
yeah, in thinking about them, Bob Hass described them as accessible one-line poems because they have this way of letting one part of the world illustrate another part of the world. A cool fall night gets illustrated by eggplants and cucumbers. And so in some ways, because they have this way of kind of folding and unfolding, or like making an idea and then illustrating that idea with a very specific image, they kind of feel like one sentence poems. And I think he wanted them to feel easy to say as a sentence. So again, that's one interpretation of what you could do with a haiku. But what I want to suggest is that this is a really fun one to do with kids. And I would like us actually in a moment to take a second to do it ourselves. But I saw Amy's hand in the air first, so.
Yeah, I was just curious, if you have any kid examples that you might have after doing this lesson with them.
Um,
That would be interesting to see. You don't have to like
no,
just just
I can
curious.
tell you one that's really seared into my heart from doing it with kids during one of these difficult seasons in California. Smoky gray October sky, fire trucks all headed in the same direction. And, what I would like to say about working with youth, especially youth that have never written poems before, is it's always nice. And we could have done this together, had a little poetry icebreaker. What do you know about poems? What do you like about poems? They can rhyme, they don't have to rhyme. They can be silly, they can be long, they can be short. They use space differently than prose. They use sound a little differently. You can enjoy the pleasure of language inside them. And just being open to what they know and don't know about poems, and then say, well, we have this exercise and we're going to give it a try. And now I've set this up. In fact, we're not all in the same place, so we can't quite do it together. Um, but it's interesting to let the kids, well, tell me something about the light and the time of day. Why doesn't somebody just tell me the light and the time of day from where you are and just put a little image in the chat, the light and the time of day. Maggie, it's gray. What kind of time what is it? It's a gray March afternoon, gray March early evening. Great. Now, um, all of us, let's have that be the first line. Sun piercing through the storm clouds. That's what Russell offered that one. I'm going to say, I'm going to do it the other way. I'm going to give you a really specific image. Now, I love these lines. Gray March early evening, sun piercing through the storm clouds, deepening blue after dinner, plum blossoms on the collard green, March, the smell of tilled earth, sunny but crazy crispy wind. We actually aren't all in the same place, but the tree branches are glowing in setting light. The mockingbird is still singing, right? And it's neat. Yeah, it's neat to try to say, now we can just do something big, right? If you're going to go to like a kids dance class, you might have them do a big gesture and then they sometimes do a small gesture. So you could ask them, okay, can you see something as big as describing the light in the sky and the time of day? And then you can say to them, Ooh, could you write something as small as the worm in the chestnut? Look around you. What do you see that's as small as the worm in the chestnut? Right? And see if they can find a way to notice something really big and something really small, and see if they can take delight in hinging those together, and see if rooting and noticing time and place can be part of it. And you might find that it's a really, really delightful activity. Because I think this is a delightful activity, I would actually like to offer us a challenge where it's 40 of an hour that you're in. I would love for us to turn off our cameras for 6 minutes. And that was because if you're the kind of person who needs to like use the restroom and get a glass of water, you have a little bit of time to do that. But go to the nearest outdoor space that you can find. And if it's just your window or your houseplants are, out sort of outdoors in, and see if you can just let yourself have time to do this exercise. And let's go ahead and come back at 3:47, the 7 minutes. It's a 7-minute exercise so that if you're distracted, you'll have a moment to come back to whatever it is. And just give yourself a chance to write as many of these as come to mind. They're a little bit like cookies. Sometimes you do a first couple cookies or art project, Valentine's craft, and then they start to get a little smoother. The first one feels lumpy, but just trust the process. Go for it. Okay, talk to you in 7 minutes. I love seeing these. Thanks for coming back from your poeming. Fragile seedlings, thin and tall, full of life as they reach for the sun. And the thing that's cool about saying seedling is we're usually in spring when we say seedling. Some plants are markers of our place in time in this particular year. So that's kind of neat to notice that you can signal time and place with a plant. I wanted, as well as just maybe reading poems, which I'm so grateful for people sharing, is if people would be so brave as to share what the experience of writing a poem or doing this exercise was like. What came up for you as you did it? Feel free to put something in the chat or be willing to talk. Ruth, would you be willing to talk about what it's like to do a little writing? Time slowed down.
Yeah, I think I took the time to notice, to be in the present, I think. That's what I would say. Can you hear me? Yeah.
I can hear you, and I
Okay.
think really an important quality that we want to bring, we hope to take from gardens as well, is our sense of being present with ourselves and with the other life around us. Yeah. So sometimes in that noticing and becoming present, we find that we have a little more spaciousness and a little more connectedness. So I'm really glad that you felt that. Are there other people that might want to share? Amy, thank you.
I'll just kind of play the devil's advocate, but also I really felt this. I do good with noticing things, but then when I feel the pressure of performing, I kind of get blocked. I thought it was easier to write down. It was easier for me to brainstorm just things that I noticed and then come back inside and then kind of put them all together. So I'm thinking for the kids who kind of don't know how to start, that's kind of how I would start. But then I loved so many different things. I didn't know how to pick that small moment. And I was, couldn't think of one thing. So I bounced back to another idea. And then I never really had anything in the paper. So I think
Well,
that would be
to be fair, you're going to do this at much longer than 7 minutes, right? You'll have maybe you'll do a group poem, maybe you'll be doing some call and response. If your kids are little second graders, sometimes they never get beyond a group poem because, sometimes they're fourth graders and they just really need help writing a few words down. Um, Maybe they just list some things they saw so that it doesn't need to be performance anxiety that way, but it is an occasion for what's the big and what's the small around you right now. But I like that you shared that maybe sometimes all you get is a list, or like the feeling that you have to make it finished right now is tough. Um, we have an hour and a half to do like an overview of a way in. So I would encourage you to feel like you can have spaciousness and also just that sense of like, it can sometimes be that you write for 10 minutes and in the 10th minute you find that your brain relaxes and is just as happy. And that for the first 10 minutes, it's a little like, um, we don't always give ourselves attention to watch our own thoughts kind of form, you know? And so this can be definitely a new exercise. And I think if we were together in the garden and had like a 3 hour or 2 hours in the garden with some spaciousness, you might feel that there was like a little bit more um, giving yourself some grace. I'm seeing comments in the chat that getting lost in the senses. And I think this giving the students a chance, the children a chance to notice and to uplift their small noticings. What is the earth smells. What's a word for that? Like, what does it smell like? Oh, like it smells like herbs, and we can start to allow them, um, oh, what sound does the bug make? Oh, what is the name of that plant? Can be a really good call towards naming, and naming can be a way of building relationship, right?
Also their feelings. Do they feel joy in the garden? Do they feel nervous? Do the bugs make them nervous? I've seen children really respond to when you say, well, how does it feel? Then rather than trying to say name something, they can talk about their own feelings in the garden.
Um, but also, nasturtium is the spicy plant, you know, and we're going to get to a little bit to some of that. I mean, I think like feeling is a great question too. Great question. How do you feel? Yeah. Other people want to share a comment of what this was like for them.
It felt very indulging.
I like that. I think we all need a little more indulgence right now. Um, and it's a way of, I think many of us are living in a time when, I mean, there's a lot of really, really difficult news coming, at us every day. And one of the reasons I think so many of us love gardening is because there's a different dimension of time that we are allowed to be part of in a garden space. And I think this is a way of helping us access that relationship to time just a little bit more. Um, and so, yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people saying that it felt like slow motion. So that's cool. Um, I'm going to be brave and say that we can do another one, and I'm really excited to do this next one. Um, this is the next poem that I want to look at as a way of teaching. Um, oh, I wanted to say one more thing about the haiku. Hold on before we do that. just go back. The other thing about these haiku that you've written is that they're sometimes a really good place to start a poem. And you could say, oh, see, that's everyone in meeting. You could have this plum blossoms on the collard green, March, the smell of tilled earth. And then you could say, I feel jumpy. I feel happy. Bugs. They can be, this noticing of the outer world can be a jumping off point for saying, for another poem or of continuing of a poem that can kind of have a little bit of alertness to that balance between the inner and the outer worlds. So I think it can be a chance to ask kids to then reflect how they're feeling, and the poem can get longer. Let's look at this next poem because I think there's another technique I wanted to propose, and I think it's one that's really great for garden educators. So I'm going to bring you into a share again, and we're going to look at a poem that's from this gardening anthology that I put together. Hold on one second. So many windows. Here. There, we're in the share. Good. Do you all see it? Interview with the pear tree. Now listen, this is a poem for two voices. And one of the voices is the interviewer, and one of the voices is the pear tree. And I have done this activity with kids of all ages, I'll say kids and adults. And I've found this one to be really beautifully unlocking. So why don't we make Jenny Garcia be the mere mortal? And can we have Mary McMahon be would you be the part of the pear tree? And I will read the stage directions. How about that? Interview with the pear tree. Jenny, do you see this? When did you start making pears?
When did you start making pears?
What is a pear?
She runs her fingers over one hanging on the branch.
Yes. It began before I could be seen, when the great body rang, striking for the first time the earth. Over the long day, it lay in the sun, and the birds came, and the flesh fell away until all that was left was the seed. Maybe it was when the moon swelled the seed, maybe when the first true leaf quickened.
Did you always know you would make pears?
I wouldn't know how not to.
What is your process?
I let the leaves come to the branch, and when the bee is at the blossom, I listen.
Is dormancy difficult?
Dormancy?
A period.
When
You go.
Sorry, I'm cutting out. A period happens.
The tree pauses.
I've never had one.
What about drought?
I spread my root hairs and wait.
Do you ever doubt?
When the bud breaks the green wood.
Do
Do
you
you ever think of
What is an apple?
Could you describe the kind of pears you make?
A ripe pear drops into her upturned hands. Thank you, readers. Also, kids really love this. And the way that I do a warm up for kids with this one is I say, let's do some interview questions. Should we interview each other? Would you like to interview each other? And their interview questions are, what is an interview? They get so excited. Are you 103? What's your favorite color? If you could use any sticky material, what would it be? That they're quite excited about interview questions. And so they really like the idea that they could do some interviewing. And then the natural assignment that springs from that is thinking about interviewing something that's in the garden. And what I love about this is it's the special technique of poems to put us in relationship with things that are sort of slightly out of reach. In poems, we often speak to the dead, to the beyond, to the future, to the past. If I were to say to you, can you mail this letter? And you would say yes, then we wouldn't be in a poem. But if I could say to you, can you mail this letter to my mother at the bottom of the sea? We would suddenly be in imaginative territory. But the point of that, especially in relation to the garden, is that the poem is a tool for building a relationship with the non-human. And this is a great format for beginning to build that relationship. Now, I believe that one of my teaching artists is right now teaching in Harding Elementary School, where we did this exercise, and what they decided to interview was a piece of obsidian, and it was on the necklace of this teaching artist. His name is Gabriel. He just had been in Mexico, and he had this piece of obsidian. And they read this poem, and they latched in immediately to the idea that the obsidian was really lava. And so their first question to the piece of obsidian was, do you miss living inside the volcano? And they went really long on it. Are you sad to be a necklace? What did it feel like to surface? How long did it take you to harden? And we did it as a group. They just had so much. We actually didn't have the obsidian answer, but we just came up with all the interview questions for the piece of it was like a necklace, right, on this lovely young man's chest. And what came out of it was an awareness of its like long geologic wholeness as an element of the earth that had moved through time, and asking whether it, was it disappointed to be a necklace? And, was it really excited to be lava? And of course they were fourth graders, so this just really exciting for them. But I do love this one. And then there was a kid who once did not think that he wanted to write this poem the way he didn't want to talk to an alive thing. So he decided he wanted to talk to asphalt. And I think he was sort of just playing with being a little cheeky. Like, I think he imagined that he was being cheeky. But what he came up with was a conversation with asphalt that asked the asphalt eventually confessed to him that it was tired of holding the earth down, and that it really was tired of like patching up cracks and like getting overheated in the sun, and that it was like so much work to make the earth flat. And ended up being this it started in a kind of the goofiest place possible, and it ended up feeling like a sort of beautiful empathy with the asphalt. So I bet you can imagine what I'm going to ask you to do right now. Can you imagine? Amy can imagine. Amy, what did we going to do?
If I'm correct, I believe we're going to go outside or anywhere and ask some questions to an inanimate object of our choice.
I would love for it, if you can make it a differently living object, that could be really nice. But as you see, if you decided that you had to talk to the asphalt, you could do it too. And the asphalt might tell you its deep history, and even a piece of rock might tell you its deep history as a long creature of the earth. So you could go do that thing. And for this, let's go ahead and take, I'm going to say 9 minutes so that we come back at the 15. And then I would like to just reflect a little bit with each of you about what this process has been like for you. And so I'll see you at the 15. Go interview something interesting. Let it call to you.
I have to go interview something.
I actually didn't write a I actually didn't write about this little scene outside, but I wanted to give you a shot of what my a little piece of my garden looks like right now.
Hi, sorry to join late because I was looking for this edible garden all the time, and I was thinking they might have like summer training program. So I was like browsing, checking, and then I all of a sudden found a workshop. So I think I joined it late, but I'm really glad you let me in. Thank you so much.
Well, we're just actually wrapping up for the last 15 minutes to talk a little bit about an experience of exploring what it might be like to write poems in and with our garden. But you're welcome to listen to this 15 minutes, and also it's been recorded. So, we're glad you're here now. So what I would love to have people share is, again, you don't have to share what you wrote, although you're welcome to if you feel that brave. What I would love to have you share is what the experience of attempting to do this was like. Can I share my interview? Yes, you can. Jocelyn, you can certainly share your interview. Would you like to share it? Would you turn on your camera to share it? Would that be okay if I asked? Thank you so much.
Yes, yes. It's really loud where I am and really windy. So I'm at the park. I picked up my kids at 3 o'clock. So I tried to like stay tuned the whole time. But yeah, I would love to share. I hope you guys can hear me okay. And I hope I did it right. It's like a list of questions.
There's not a wrong. Yeah, I mean, whatever you tried to do, you took a risk and explored poem writing, and there is not a wrong thing you could have done.
Awesome. Okay, so here is me interviewing wood chips, like at a Facebook. So it says, how did you get here? Did you come from one tree, two, or hundreds? How do you feel after all the rain last night? How do you feel every day after everyone has stepped all over you? Do you like the park? Do you like kids? Have you ever gotten stuck in someone's shoe? Did you laugh or feel ashamed? Are you happy? Do you know your purpose? You no longer have roots, but are you still alive? And that was as far as I got.
Love it. I love that Jenny said I could almost feel a different area of my brain engaging. And I do want to remind people that the parts of our brain that engage literature and imaginative thought are the parts of our brain deeply welded to empathy. And it can happen that if you're reading a piece, and it doesn't happen actually with nonfiction, if you're reading a piece of fiction, they've actually found that's the further that you have to go, like 19th century Russia versus like, the present. And again, a news article isn't necessarily going to do this. Having to leap across boundaries with your imagination through linguistic experience actually stimulates the part of your brain related to empathy. And I would just like to encourage you that if you could feel a sort of networky part of your brain happening, I don't mean to imply that you're not an empathetic person, but I would like to say that this is a piece of ourselves that we aren't always allowed to use in its fullness, where we're making connections and imagining empathetic connections across boundaries that we might not. And that muscle of empathy is perhaps we should all feel one that we are really hoping to cultivate as gardeners and as humans right now. It's certainly something that we're definitely feeling a wish for in the current world. I'll say that as gently as I can, right? So, so this is a really, but that tingly feeling in your brain is a good one. It's a good feeling if you had it, and if you haven't um, had an occasion to think that way. But I think it's also really great for the kids, and the kids sometimes I've noticed with poetry exercises with kids, it's sometimes nice to do maybe 3 across weeks. You know, if you're daring to do poetry time with kids in the garden, it can be that you might want one workshop to get them willing to take risks, and another one, and they'll write more, and the third one, and they're like on fire and they trust that this is a real thing that they can do. So if you're interested in learning more about sort of structuring a poetry class for kids in the garden space, you can certainly reach out. I'll have some resources for that at the end. But I love that. Jocelyn, how did it feel to write that poem for wood chips? What was that like for you? I loved the poem.
Thank you. It was like, it's really hard to explain and put into words, but I feel like I like tapped into like a whole different world, you know, really thinking about um like the experience of being a wood chick and like how it went into being poetic. It's like it's just really beautiful. And you know, I love how you said like there was no rules. You know, there's no right or wrong way. And I think that's really the beautiful part about poetry. And for kids to also know and have that freedom, you know, to just write and not feel like, oh, well, you did this part wrong, or try to do this. It's really free. I felt very free and very creative and fun. Like it was fun and like exciting, you know?
I
So
love
I'm like,
that.
what am I gonna choose around me? There's a lot of trees, and then I'm like literally out of play structure. I'm like gonna turn my camera around so you guys can see, and there's wood chips everywhere. So I'm like, okay, let's do wood chips.
But I mean, in
Um,
a way, it reminds me of the asphalt poem, where sometimes you think you're not having that conversation, but you know, even the management of these spaces is really interesting. Was anyone write a poem where they let the things respond to them? Did anyone find that that thing that they were talking to gave them some answers?
I did. I,
Yeah.
I wrote the answers to my questions too. And this one was a little harder for me than the first one. And I had a couple of false starts, but then I decided that that's okay. You know, that's like when you're talking to people, sometimes at a party, you like the first person you talk to, you're like, I don't really have anything to say to this person, it turns out. And then you hit, you know, the third person and you start talking and talking and talking and keep going. So it wasn't until my third subject that I really got into it. And I do think like looking at Ruth's question, I ended up with a sugar maple tree. And part of the reason why I was able to like do more questions and answers with it is because I knew more about its life cycle and its phenology and its natural history. So I felt like I could write answers a little bit better without doing any sort of research or anything. Um, but it was kind of hard to take in some ways to take the perspective of the tree because you know, because we're totally conjecturing, you know, do trees find the winter restful and restorative, or do they find it stressful and hard to survive? Like, you know, I had to make my guess at which answer that would be. Um, or whatever. So yeah, it was interesting, but writing the answers was harder for me than writing the questions. But I enjoyed doing it. So yeah.
Um, I taught a similar class like this to not a group of garden teachers, but to a group of Zen Buddhist practitioners. And they, of course, were really deeply engrossed in the question of like the ethics of having the voice of the non-human. And they went to like a really high level of that and sort of came round to the notion that even this artificial conversation in a human medium was a a form of meditation that they approved of. Do you see what I mean? Like that, like the imperfect conversation of the human with the non-human, even in this funny way, was okay with them as long as it was like an earnest, true conversation, which is interesting because, you know, of course, there's so many ways in which we're not attuned to trying to listen or pay attention or root or notice, you know, and there's a lot of erasure of the specificity of these days, you know, and I'm just gonna like show this image again of this garden this morning, my garden this morning.
And all of it, like doing any of it with seemed to me to be a little bit of anthropomorphizing, you know, like a lot of these answers from a plant seem to be anthropomorphizing, although we know now that plants do a lot more communicating and whatnot than people previously thought. But I just got past that. I'm going to anthropomorphize this tree.
Totally. And but I think that's a vessel for relationship and curiosity and wonder, which leads us to some of the other disciplines we might want to do as well, right? I think in our society, we sort of live in this world where art and science are really separate from each other, but we know that in a garden, art and science are really intensely welded. And we know that science begins in observation and wonder and curiosity. And this poem writing exercise is a kind of a vehicle for that curiosity. And you could flip the discipline a little bit, but I think the idea of delight and beauty and wonder. I mean, I actually know the woman who Inez Fung, she's a climatologist at UC Berkeley, and she really early on in the 80s began to predict climate change. But it turns out that her original project was that she wanted to understand how clouds move. And it still isn't really a well understood phenomenon, clouds, how they move through the sky and the shapes they make and why. And in the process of trying to get that, she found that there were these disturbing trends. But she said, you know, really what drew me in was not trying to predict disturbing trends, but the fact that clouds are really beautiful and we don't understand them. And that's actually what brings me back when I'm depressed or lost or sad, is that I really still wonder about the beauty of clouds. And she has this slideshow about clouds. And I think bringing people into some ethical conversation can be really great. I want to, if you would humor me, I had so much fun with writing myself. I'd like to read you a few lines of what I wrote outside. And then maybe everybody could put in the chat one thing they're going to take with them. And we'll say goodbye. Russell, would you put up the thing about how to stay in touch if you'd like to? If you'd like to purchase this book to teach in your garden, my favorite bookstore in Berkeley is called Pegasus, and I'm happy to sign a copy for you. Or you can just get it a normal way through bookstores. It's fun for kids because it's illustrated. It's actually fun for adults. It's like an illustrated book for kids and adults both. And there's these like lovely kind of garden poems. You might find it nourishing for your practice as a garden teacher and educator. It might be fun. You might find that there's activities inside for you to teach from. It might spark your writing practice. And so if we go, I'm going to stop the share. And the ways to be in touch with me, if you were so moved. Russell, I don't know where my slide. Oh, here it is. There we go. Thank you.
Yeah,
It's
no
like too
problem.
many
Yeah.
toggles.
Yeah, yeah.
But this is that inside of that garden book, and there's the haiku, and we're going to go forward. But if you want to order some books, there's this one at Solano Bookstore and Pegasus. And then you can also stay in touch with me. I would be more than happy to follow up a conversation with you. If you're in California and you want to visit, I'd be happy to visit your garden. But also, I think I really want to just encourage that this is a way of connecting different parts of ourselves, and different parts of our knowledge and education. So I'll just go out. If everybody would just put a little phrase in the chat about what you think you might take with you, I'll read you a tiny little interview with a fern. Do you mind this new spot in the backyard? I'm old. I'm only some of us. This is only one of our lives. Are you multiple? We are Dusty and Sporus. Well, do you mind that I've potted you? I'm only clay. It is only clay. Clay is only one of Earth's mediums. What do you know about us? You like caves, you like pots. We prefer shade and hillsides. We belong to huge mats. Why are you here, beyond this garden? We're here to talk to the future. We're here to decay into the beyond. When do you talk to the future? Do you know what will happen? We don't know, but we talk when the spring wind comes. So anyway, that. And I encourage you to keep your conversations with all things going. And I encourage you to bring some of this conversation to the kids that you are spending time with. And I thank you so much for the work that you're doing, tending the good ecosystem. I think technically we're done, but I'm happy to hang around for a minute in case anyone has a comment or a question. But certainly it's 4:30 in the West Coast, so it's probably late where some of you are, and maybe you're tuning in for a recording. So just thanks so much for joining. I've really had a fun time today, and I hope you'd had too.
Just just to echo and just wanted to hop in and say thank you so much, Tess, for joining for this amazing workshop. And thank you to everybody for participating with such presence and generosity. And yeah, I think I just am so excited to see this in application for students. So, but I just wanted to add that real quick, and then I'll let anyone who has any closing thoughts or questions share.
These are great comments, by the way. I love that somebody got to interview an ermine under their window. And I love that some of you I'll see maybe around the Bay Area. So yeah, I completely am so glad to think that maybe some of you will take these seeds and plant them where you are.
Tess, I have a quick question.
Sure.
If you work with very young children, like first grade, it can take a long time to write words. Do you have recommendations for doing this without having to write the words down? I mean, it sounds like you could do the interviews and things without writing.
I usually hold up the notebook and I write down what they say, and then I read it back to them.
Thank you.
And then they can think of great interview questions. So all you have to do is write really fast. And then they love it. And I also find that with kids of all, like if you offer slightly older kids, especially if you have any support, like you start writing and there's usually a kid with some need to have something written down for them. If you do this with no shame, this is like a chance to get their stuff out. I have discovered so many kids this year who are not writing like even close to grade level, but they love to do this if you come near them and you write for them. So I always, it can be a group poem, it can be a shared poem, it can be something where you listen and you write for them, if you have the opportunity to give them that time. And sometimes that can be like a game changer, actually, to have somebody who's like sits and writes down your ideas for you. So yeah, Amy.
I have another quick question. Would you consider the list of questions to be the poem?
Yes, I saw that go by in the chat, but I didn't.
So if we don't respond to the questions, just a list of questions without a response could be a poem. And then, so there's really no, there's no real structure except for it's just kind of the questions and the imagination that went into that.
Well, especially when it's a group poem by the kids, like the kids who interviewed the obsidian and then decided to go long on the lava and the volcano, and then they just were building on each other. They never got the answers. But what they did do is they got this incredibly imaginative version of like a very ordinary object in front of them, and it became like a micro history of the earth. And I think, even I've done this exercise and I always try to do it too. And sometimes the thing doesn't talk back to me. Like today, the fern out just had this big opinion about its life in time. But sometimes, so even when you're doing it yourself, you might just come up with questions. And I noticed Jocelyn said critical thinking doesn't have to be excruciating. I love that. No, Jocelyn, but like she just wrote the list of questions. I think that's just fine. And it seems that even the questions lead to empathy of some kind, right? Yeah. Cool.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? And I've got to run to the next thing, but I'm really, really delighted to be here. So I hope
Yes.
I'll see some of you.
I sent this to you and to Russell, but I just want to say thank you so much. Poetry has been very intimidating for me my whole life for some of the reasons you just listed for kiddos, like to help instruct and write for them. And so in my 40s, working with kiddos, this short workshop kind of cracked that open. And I cannot wait to bring this to our farm next week and then to our summer programming and things. So I will be reaching out for a couple, planting seeds and requests and exciting opportunities.
Well, I mean, my other first beloved job was as like a youth educator in a garden. So like, I mean, I can't think of a happier place actually to go do poetry. Like, and that's partly why I recircled around with the Edible Schoolyard when I did this. I was like, Alice, I grew up and I made this book. So it's a really joyful homecoming for me. And it's to me, they're like the same mission. It's the same mission. It's like feel and taste your life in the world and then have some ownership of it. Like it's all the same project. So that's a very earnest truth. So I'm, yes, absolutely delighted to come join you in Stockton as soon as is feasible.
Great. I'm just gonna like preface that with we have a festival called Fruit Jam, but I've kind of reframed that into Fruit Slam Jam for the reason that I'd like to bring poetry to this as like a poetry slam. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay. Well, I really do have to run to the next meeting now, but thank you guys. And